Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Sustainability Series, our mini webinar series that explores conscious consumerism in e-commerce. In each episode, we'll be talking to a guest partner about how offering your customers a sustainable shopping experience can create community, inspire action, and drive loyalty. So we're all really excited. There's some really poignant topics that we're going to be talking about today. So to keep these episodes relatively quick and insightful, we don't hold any form of Q&A. However, if you do have any questions that you'd like to put to LoyaltyLion or today's guests, then please do tweet at LoyaltyLion HQ using the hashtag sustainable series, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So with that in mind, let's jump in. My name is Jack. I'm a technology partnerships manager at LoyaltyLion, and I have the fabulous job of working with our different tech and agency partners around the globe. And I'm so excited to be joined by Jake Chatt from Ecocart. So Jake, would you mind giving us a quick introduction to yourself and about Ecocart in general?
Yeah. So thanks again for having me. Of course, I'm really excited to be here. So I'm the head of marketing at Ecocart. I've been in the e-commerce software space for around a decade now, probably. And what we do at Ecocart is we're sort of a all-encompassing sustainability solution. So we really have started off as like a carbon calculator that then translates that into front-end communications in customer experiences. And we are now expanding beyond that into other facets of sustainability, like plastic offsetting, water usage offsetting, so on and so forth. So we're really just trying to help brands as well as consumers make e-commerce a more sustainable industry in general. So,
Okay, yep. Fantastic. And one thing that comes up a lot when we look at Ecocart and the work that you're doing, especially the marketing that you're doing, is that you release a lot of content. And in your most recent ebook, Using Sustainability to Unlock E-commerce Growth, you do talk a lot about the dark side of e-commerce. And I'd be curious if you could tell us a little bit more about this and how brands can potentially avoid this pitfall.
Yeah, of course. So I want to start off kind of by saying, I think that term or phrase is obviously a little bit purposefully sensationalist to kind of get people's attention. And, it sounds kind of scary in a way, the dark side or whatever. But what we're really talking about here is that commerce in general, for probably the last almost 150 years now, right? Like 1880s is when we started really using fossil fuels to in transportation and to power manufacturing, so on and so forth. So like, with commerce and especially e-commerce now, which is like a global marketplace, right? We see that there is an ecological impact to all of the decisions we're making, all of the actions we're taking. Like I said, when it comes to processing raw materials to make actual developed goods, all the way to powering warehouses, the energy that goes behind actually powering the warehouses, and then of course to like the various types of transportation to get goods from the manufacturer to the warehouse, and then of course to in that last mile delivery to the final consumer type of thing, right? So what we're really talking about here is that, like, yes, commerce is great and it powers a lot of what we do as humans, innovation. It quite literally has made our society better, safer, more technologically advanced as we go throughout the years. But there is a cost to it, to the world, right? So, as we burn fossil fuels, we are emitting carbon into the atmosphere. And as we become more global as individual brands, we've been shipping more goods, we've been storing more goods, we've been needing to package goods even more, right? Because we used to only have to package large amounts that were going to the retail stores. Now we're packaging smaller amounts that are going to individuals, which is creating more waste, whether that's plastic or non-plastic, of course. And so what we're talking about here is like that people need to be paying attention to these things in addition to just being successful brands and, driving the commerce that we all want to be driving, because we do have to be looking after the planet, and we obviously want to be operating, I guess is the best way to put it, operating our businesses in as sustainable of a way as possible. So how can brands, really avoid this type of thing? Of course, the first thing we like to really say is the best thing you can do is minimize, right? So minimize the carbon emissions that you're putting out, minimize the amount of plastic you're using in your product development and your packaging, minimize, the long distances, so on and so forth. And ways that people can do this really are, working with manufacturers who are powering their factories on greener energy, right? A lot of them are not fully green, but a lot of them nowadays are partially using greener energies like water, like nuclear even, or wind, so on and so forth, just things that are better than, fossil fuels, of course. And then, of course, like some of the more strategic things you can do are like creating a decentralized warehousing system. So, a lot of people, like historically, you had a warehouse or two warehouses, and you kept everything in those warehouses. And then no matter where the end person who was buying it was, you had to ship it from there to them. So that included, air travel, freight travel, as well as land travel often, like all three frequently, right? And obviously freight travel is really bad, air travel is second bad, and then land travel is typically the best when it comes to carbon emissions being emitted, carbon being emitted into the air. So like creating a decentralized warehousing system where you have more warehouses and more geolocations, and you keep less goods in those warehouses. So you just rent out like a portion of the warehouse, for example, but you just to service that specific, radius around that warehouse. It makes it so that you have goods there for when people want them. And so then they're traveling, less distances, basically, which is a really great thing you can do. And then, of course, like I said, there are also lots of innovators in the space who are working on like the packaging issue, right? As well as like innovation in like what it means to create products that just without their packaging innately have like plastic in them, right? Like using these new technologies, using this new packaging types, so that you're putting less of these wastes into the environment that don't break down like paper does, or like other biodegradable materials, right? So just really partnering with these vendors and these third parties who are looking to be more sustainable in the warehousing, in the packaging, in the manufacturing space. That's first and foremost what you could really be looking for, right? But of course, like all of these are like huge, daunting changes to your operations, right? Like, and it can get really costly and be very scary, right? Which is something we see all the time when we're talking to merchants about sustainability. So, a place, that isn't so daunting, I guess. And again, I do typically advocate for minimizing first, but then that second part there, which is really what we're doing currently at Ecocart, is leaning into the offsetting side of things, right? So even if you minimize as much as you can, you're always going to have emissions, you're always going to have waste, et cetera, right? You're manufacturing goods, you're shipping goods, so on and so forth. You're never going to get to zero just naturally, at least not in the current state of things. So partnering with projects or organizations who are participating in activities like protecting forests, building cleaner energy resources, there's all kinds of things, right? Even like planting trees, so on and so forth, right? To basically suck in the carbon emissions that are being put into the atmosphere, so that you can counteract the ecological footprint that your operations are having on the planet. That's another thing you can do here, right? So like, again, I like to say minimize first and then offset the rest, but like you can also just offset if you can't minimize right now, and you're also having a positive impact. So.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I think especially, I mean, one of the statistics we talk about a lot is that on average, e-commerce grows as an industry by about, I think it's 14% year on year. And COVID accounted for something ridiculous, like 7 years of growth all at once. So we still need these solutions to kind of grow with the industry to continue to make sure that we are offsetting some of that negative impact which we are seeing globally. Absolutely fantastic. With that in mind, one little question that comes up is when you have all of these different kind of like remedies which you're potentially picking between, be it 3PLs or be it marketing initiatives, is there anything that you can do to prevent against greenwashing, for example? Or are there any sort of tricks or any sort of ways that you can gauge whether or not a business would be credible that you could be partnering with?
Of course, right? So I think that first and foremost, transparency is vital in this space right now. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of like, is this real? Are you just doing this to look good? Like all over the place, is, right? So first and foremost, just being transparent about like, if you as a merchant, for example, are just getting started on your what we like to call your sustainability story, if you're just getting started, you probably oftentimes are just as confused, just as cautious, just as worried about greenwashing as the people that you're talking to, the consumers, right? And so being transparent about, hey, like I'm learning this and getting into this just as much as you all are, and like just really being on that journey with your audience is the first and most important thing that we like to kind of tell merchants in this, like in this position, I guess is how I would put it. And so like what we personally do at Ecocart to avoid greenwashing is we only work with projects and organizations that are standardized by the global standards, right? So there's all kinds of global standards depending on what country you're in, so on and so forth. But we typically like to really lean into like the ones that have the widest reach and the widest agreements, which typically are sourced back to the UN, right? So a great example on like an anecdote, I guess, from our end that I could bring up here is we do sometimes have merchants approach us and they kind of want to bring their own project in to fund, right? And so we always are willing to go out and look and talk to them and figure out like what this project's about, so on and so forth. But if the project's not standardized by the standards that we go by, we refuse to work with them because there is so much confusion. It's such a new space right now. And like, we just, even us, right, as people who are leaders in the space at this point, want to make sure that we're not misstepping in any way, because it's so easy to quickly tarnish your reputation. If you make one wrong misstep and you partner with an organization that isn't doing what they say they're doing, right? And the cool thing here about the standardizations, my last point I want to make here is there's technology today that is going out of their way to verify that side of things. That's so fascinating and magnificent, right? So like, you have like Pachama, for example, who are like surveying what these projects are doing and can like confirm the amount of CO2 that is being sequestered by the project from the atmosphere, right? So like, as we become more and more advanced, it'll be easier to tell when something is valid and when something isn't. And I think, again, like going back to my original point is it's just being transparent that you're on this journey too. And like, I'm looking into this too, I'm vetting things too, but I like, just bear with me type of thing, right?
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. It's one of the things that we say a lot with loyalty programs as well. At the end of the day, you are working to give something to your customers that they're going to enjoy and appreciate. And with that in mind, engaging with them, making sure they understand the value and that they can offer their feedback is imperative to success. So fabulous answer. Thank you for taking us through that. So moving on from that, I'd be really curious to hear if you can share any examples of brands who are offering currently a sustainable shopping experience to build customer loyalty. Are there any that you've come across?
Yeah, of course. So in a way, I would like to say every customer of ours at Ecocart is doing this in a way, even if they don't have a direct loyalty program, which I will talk about examples with direct loyalty programs tied to sustainable shopping actions. But I think that a lot of brands, and if they're talking about the sustainability initiatives that they're implementing, it is in a way to build relationships with customers, right? Like the whole reason this is becoming such a hot topic is not because brands woke up one day and decided to do this. Like, the market is telling everyone this is where we're moving, right? Shoppers want it. We see, 95% of shoppers in one survey we did said that they would prefer to shop with brands who are taking climate action, right? Like, of course, their actions don't always mimic that, but they would prefer that. And I think that, really, if you're implementing anything and if you're talking and communicating about it to your customers, then you are trying to build relationships, which is loyalty in the long run. Some good examples of this, of like actual programs though, right, are the leaders in the space that I really like to talk about, who, may not be customers of ours right now, but are really great at it. So, the Patagonias and the REIs of the world, right, who are who build out programs like offer specific loyalty credit cards, for example, that are all about like offsetting or donating to specific programs with your purchases, with every single purchase, right? To actually offset the emissions created by your orders. Other examples of this are like more native loyalty programs where brands will basically tie more loyalty points when someone takes a sustainable action over if they took more of the status quo action. Status quo action, which, when I say this, what I really mean is like what our original offering was offering for shoppers to actually pay a small portion of their order total to the brand in order to offset their own carbon emissions of their own order, right? So what that would mean is this partnered with a loyalty program would be when someone decides to make that donation, they're getting double the loyalty points of if they were to just make that purchase without making that decision, right? So just really creating extra incentives to encourage shoppers to actually want to make the sustainable decision with you, right? So like, I think that like going beyond just like convincing them to do that with that extra incentive, you're also like creating a compounding effect of saying, I care about this, you care about this, we can do this together.
Yes.
And something cool that we see a lot of customers do is they create like impact pages with like impact counters, for example, to really show like over time, this is what our community has done, which again is another compounding effect of like creating loyalty. Like we are a community together. Look at all of the carbon we've offset. Look at all the plastic we've removed from the ocean, so on and so forth. So
absolutely. Yeah. That's really interesting. And I love the idea of bringing it back to community. Community is so integral to brand identity, and everything that you mentioned is a way of remaining on brand. And the best examples that we have in terms of our pre-existing clients are the ones who kind of make the environmental experience, the loyalty experience, everything harken back to their integral core values of a brand. So if you are into sustainability, if you're into environmental issues, if you are into women's welfare, whatever it may be, make sure that you are putting those front and center of every single thing that you do. So fantastic answer. Thank you.
Of course. Okay.
So my final question is, obviously, sometimes this can seem a little bit daunting. We've discussed a lot today, and there's a lot of different ways to go about launching and becoming more sustainable. So for any brands listening today who would like to become more sustainable but don't necessarily know where to start, what advice would you give to them?
So this actually comes up quite often, I would argue, right? Because we, of course, talk to a lot of, small to small medium brands as well, who, again, going back to my earlier answer of don't really have the bandwidth, the money, or the wherewithal to actually go into their operations and like completely revolutionize who they're working with, what they're doing, so on and so forth. Because again, it can be very expensive, very daunting. And so of course, like, I come off a little as like a salesy guy when I talk about this, because this is, kind of our bread and butter. But I really do think that a good starting point for any brand, no matter the size you are, if you just don't know where to get started, start offsetting, right? And like, there are plenty of brands who partner with projects one-to-one. Like they don't even have like an intermediate like broker or like a solution like us or anything, but they just themselves find a project that they partner with and they decide, hey, for every order, we're going to donate this much to you or whatever, right? And so really like just leaning into the offsetting, whether it's carbon offsetting, whether it's plastic offsetting, because you're like you were saying, making sure it's aligning to your brand values. So like, if you're a surf company or a suntan lotion company, for example, and the ocean is very important to you and your community, right? Maybe like reef protection is the most important, just really finding the orgs, the projects that really align with your brand and, making giving them money and funding them an integral part of what your customer experience is and what your brand is, right? And I think that it's important to note that like a lot of people like to think like offsetting is sort of secondary thing, right? Like I said, I, as someone who cares about this, even say like minimize first, offset second, right? But like offsetting is very important too. And in fact, a couple of days ago at a meeting for the UN, they even said that we're at a point now where we're going to have to offset to the point where we're actually having a negative and like a negative carbon emission impact into the environment, right? Because we're just so far gone that we actually have to be pulling carbon out of the air at this point. It's not enough to just stop emitting carbon into the air. And like the other thing about it, right, is it's much more immediate. You can get started with this in days, literally, right? Where you're already having a positive or a neutral impact on the environment by offsetting, again, within days, whereas those more robust like minimization strategies and tactics are going to take, months, if not years sometimes. So I really think like if you're looking to get started today, look into offsetting. So yeah,
interesting. And that's some UN endorsed advice, so hard to argue with that. Perfect. Well, I think that's probably all we have time for today, but Jake, thank you so much. It's been so wonderful chatting with you. And if our viewers want to learn more about yourself and Ecocart, is there anywhere in particular that they should go?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you again for having me. And if you want to learn more about Ecocart, you can of course come to our website. It's ecocart.io, ecocart.io. And then me, I'm Jake Chatt. Again, I'm the head of marketing there. If you have any direct questions for me, you can reach out to me. It's just jake@ecocart.io. And I'd love to hear from you.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode on the sustainability series. I hope everyone listening had found it valuable and has some great insight and ideas to implement. As always, we'll be sharing the on-demand recording afterwards, so please don't worry if you feel like you've missed anything. And lastly, Jake, such a big thank you for being with us here today. We really, really appreciate it. And to everyone watching, just a reminder that if you want to reach out to Ecocart or LoyaltyLion, you can do so using the hashtag sustainability series or get in touch via our website. Thank you so much.
Thanks.